Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I am your host, Scott, of course, and this is my co-host, Caleb. Caleb, what's going on tonight? You're looking good.
I smile every time you say greetings, and it almost messes you up every time.
Yep, it does, and that's the point. Well, welcome back. Thank you for listening. We're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. So, Caleb, this is a pretty special one.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we're kind of rounding out some of the friend groups. So today we're talking to our old and very good friend, Mike. I will say that of all the people we've talked to besides you, I probably spent the most time in high school with Mike and Bill too, to a certain extent, but some crossover on other things. Mike and I spent quite a bit of time together. So it was a lot of reminiscing. We tried to stay away from some of the very specific stories, but it was a little hard to do that. We really wanted to. I haven't talked to the guy in 20 years.
Yeah, and I'd stayed a little more context. I'd played softball with him throughout the years, but it has been a couple of years since I've seen him. And we used to, they're connected with Bill and his wife, and so I'll see him at events that are at Bill's house. So I've seen him a couple times. It's Mike and his wife since then too. Mm-hmm. So I've seen him a little more frequently. But you said, I spent a lot of time with Mike. It was really interesting to hear how late he started coming to youth group, because I feel like, man, by my senior year, because I was a year ahead of you guys, I was seeing Mike a lot. Like his junior year, my senior year, we were seeing each other a lot because he worked at Burger King, I worked at McDonald's. He would drive me at times to work, and then he'd pick me up after work. We were both doing on-the-job training, so we were leaving school early to go work. I mean, maybe he wasn't doing it. I know I was. I saw Mike a lot that senior year. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember very often you guys graciously trying to pick me up from high school and me waking up to you in my driveway honking at me because I was not awake yet. And it's just the classic stuff that we all had to work through. But,
yeah,
man, I really appreciated understanding his journey. And honestly, some of the impetus for this podcast was let's remember some of that stuff and how it started, because like many of us, when we go back to the origins of that youth group, a lot of us, his parents did not go to that church, and his certainly did not. So he kind of talks about that, and that's an interesting angle of how the church kind of filled a family role in his life, which I had forgotten about. And I really appreciated his willingness to talk about how church helped fill some of that for him, because a lot of kids do this and do youth group because their home life isn't great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciated his honesty about that.
Him as an archetype for not just what I think made our youth group experience interesting, but also why we thought about doing this. So from the high school perspective, exactly that. Just like you and Bill and him, your parents were not at the church. Your home life was probably a little different than his and also different than Bill's. But I mean, none of you guys, your parents were not going to the church at the time that you were attending youth group. They were maybe involved in other churches, but they weren't at our church. So that's an archetype that I think is really interesting from our youth group experience. How many kids were that similar to that, and how many kids were in that same situation? But then also we've made reference to kind of him. We've talked about this idea that we want to hear people's stories, everybody from people who've left the faith to people who are still at the church. And he's always been the one. I know we've talked to a couple of people who are still at the church, amazingly, but he's always been the one that's in my mind that is still there and is still at Five Oaks. And
he literally never left. He's talked about since that day in high school, in 1996 or whatever it was.
He's barely left the building. They're fumigating. He refuses. I'm not. I will not leave.
Very committed. This is the type of commitment Jesus really asked for. But no, I appreciate the fact that he talked about how that's impacted his kid's life. I think he got married the first out of all of us.
Yep.
And a couple of his kids are out of high school now. So he started that journey really early, but his kids went through it, and he created a great family for his own children, and so like, did they need to emulate, copy the family acceptance part of youth group that he experienced?
Right.
And I
Yeah.
found that part of the conversation really interesting because I try to connect like his experience with his own kids.
I can always remember the time of year when Mike got married and kind of the things around his, because right when my dad had his really, really bad bicycle accident. So
Mm.
in their wedding photos, my dad is like, he's in their wedding photos because he was sitting on the aisle as Stephanie's coming down the aisle. Here's my dad all like bloody and bandaged in their wedding photos. I still remember it to this day.
It's the type of stuff that would be photoshopped now, but they didn't have that
It's just
technology back
he's
then.
sitting there looking like he can barely move because he had fallen off his bike so bad.
Sure,
So
sure. Well, Mike, if you're listening, we really appreciate. I hope you're listening, but I
yeah,
get if you're not. But
I don't even like listening.
yeah, yeah, I'm not a fan of this podcast. But no, we really appreciate the time you spent with us, and for everyone else, thanks for listening again, and we hope you enjoy.
Sorry, my dad ruined your wedding photos. Hi, this is Caleb, the producer of the show, just breaking in like I do every episode to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this show may not actually be held or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead let people share how they feel. We also know that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remembered the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
All right, Mike, welcome. It's really good to see you. It's been far, far too long. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being here. For the listener at home, this is Mike. He's one of our oldest, dearest friends. We did a lot of hanging out together back in the day, and really interested in his perspective on his memories of youth group because, yeah, we did a lot of growing up together.
I
And
spent a lot of time in that passenger seat of that old gray falling apart car, and let me tell you.
79 Mercury Monarch.
Exactly.
You spend a lot of time waiting in my driveway for me to wake up to get to school.
Yes.
Yeah,
In
so
that
much
car.
time you had your name duct taped on the front seat.
I did. I duct taped my name on the front seat just to remind everyone, including a significant other, whose spot it really was.
I used to make Eric sit in the back because I'm like, well, that's Caleb's seat.
Even if Caleb wasn't there. Oh, yes. Oh, man. Lord. Well, yeah, we did a lot together when in our high school days, that's for sure. So just give us I even forget, it's been so long. Like, when did you get introduced to Five Oaks? Like, how did you start becoming part of that youth group?
Yeah, so I guess it all started. Jackie sat in front of me in, I don't know, every class we had in high school. And she had a problem facing forward, I guess, because she would turn around and talk to me all the time and flirt with me and all that. So she
Mm-hmm.
invited me to the youth group our sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And that was you and I graduated same year, so it was like
98.
95.
So that would
Yeah.
have been 95. Yeah. Yep.
95. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And like, did that kind of jive with kind of where you came from, your home life, that sort of thing, or was that was kind of like completely separate from how you were growing up, right?
Yeah, definitely. My family, I would say they're devout Catholics, most of them. Others are Christmas and Easter Catholics. But both sides of my family, both grandparents were definitely devout Catholics.
Mm.
And I don't know, it was maybe about fifth grade we had the option to choose to go to church or go to, I think they call it CCD back then, or the youth group version of at the Catholic Church. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was like, I raised my hand right away and said, I think I'm done. Um, so it was pretty much unchurched from that point until attending Five Oaks and specifically the youth group.
Right. As most fifth graders probably would. They'd be like,
Yeah, for
nope,
sure. Yeah.
see you later. No, I get it. So how did like Five Oaks kind of shape your faith life? Like we kind of watched you grow quite a bit. We all did multiple trips together and various forms and stuff. Like how did like think back if you could think back to specifically what was happening for you at that time, like how did Five Oaks kind of start that in you and almost send you off to where you're at now?
Yeah. So basically, probably the biggest thing was December of '95. We went to a Dawson McAllister conference.
Mm-hmm.
Dawson really talked about divorce was, I think, kind of the topic, and my parents had recently been divorced, just a few years earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and he really talked about Jesus in a different way than I learned in the Catholic Church. He talked about having a personal relationship with him, and talked about God as our Father and wanting His children to be with Him forever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where it started. And at that conference, I still remember I stood up and walked down, and some of the guys from Five Oaks that I had no idea who they were really were there, prayed with me, and I accepted Christ as my Savior that night at Dawson.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, I don't remember if it was Friday or Saturday night. I think, if I remember right, that was like a 2 or 3 day conference.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
It's like all weekend. Yeah.
It was all weekend. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And from there, I don't think I started attending church right away at Five Oaks. It was more the youth group,
Mm-hmm.
but it probably wasn't too long. Maybe a month or two later, I drove that old beat up '79 Mercury Monarch into the high school parking lot and started
Yeah.
attending Five Oaks then. So probably like right around early 1996.
Sure.
So
Sure. I always like we were talking beforehand, like how old our kids are getting and stuff. Like, a it's hard to it's hard to remember ourselves as kids during that time because obviously we totally were. But we all were in youth group for a handful of years together. It just felt like forever, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's a common experience for a lot of kids and youth group is that those 4 years, 3 years you're all together there are super. They're just like they feel like your entire lifetime.
yeah, it really is intense time. Like you
Mm,
said. I
good
mean,
word.
obviously we all spent a lot of time together. It wasn't just Wednesday nights or
Hmm.
basketball games in the cul-de-sac at your parents' house, or
Hmm.
playing video games in the Sarla basement. It was just a lot of just doing whatever together, just hanging out, just driving around,
Hmm.
playing
Yeah.
basketball, baseball, whatever it was. It was some real intense time
Yep.
where you can develop really good friendships.
Yeah, for sure. Ones that I'm like still super thankful for, like you and other people, super formative for me. I'm curious, very curious about kind of what it's like now because we've talked to, a handful of people that were close,
Yeah,
and even a couple that I did not know or expect are still like involved with the
yeah,
church. I'm assuming that you guys are you are too, right? At least in a small group setting.
yeah. So I started, like I said, at Five Oaks in 1996, and there hasn't been a month since then that we haven't regularly attended Five Oaks. I can't say 4 times with vacations and all that stuff, but most months in the last, whatever that is, 30 years,
Hmm.
almost, it's
Close.
it's it's every Sunday.
Hmm.
It's really been a blessing for me, and it's been amazing to see the church grow. When we started, it was maybe a couple hundred people, 225 maybe, with 125 in the youth group. You know, um, we used to say we have a youth group that has a church as well. So,
Yeah.
um, to maybe the high of, I don't know, in the teens, and then a little bit of a drop, and on a surge again. So it's been real neat to see Pastor Henry grow as a pastor, and
Hmm.
the area around us grow, and new people coming to the church, and going from one service to two to three. You know, um,
Yeah.
all that neat stuff.
There's a certain point at which churches plateau, right? And that's just
Yep.
kind of natural for any church organization. And I just feel like whether or not the church has plateaued, there have been a lot of people who are the same people, and not just like a core group of like 15. Like there's many, many, many people. I can't say it for myself because I've moved
Yep.
around, but it's kind of incredible.
It would be interesting to know the number of families that have been there for 25 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's been really neat. Now part of that maybe is those folks have stayed around Woodbury.
Yep.
And that's where we've been basically our whole married life together. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really our home. It's our church home, and you guys kind of know my parents' background. Both of my parents live in the state, but I don't have a real great relationship with either one of them.
Mm.
I would say I had a better relationship with Stephanie's dad when they lived in San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
3,000 miles away or whatever, than I have with my father, lived 300 miles away.
Yeah.
So, or maybe even less than that, 30 miles away at times.
Mm-hmm.
So Five Oaks has really been a big part of our life, and it's really been our family.
You're starting to get that. You're starting to get what generations, like second generation people who are going there. I mean, the whole pastor thing that's a great, it's an interesting example. And I'm sure that happens at churches, but
yeah,
I think for when we were there as kids to now actually see it, like you get second generation, I think that's pretty interesting to kind of see that play out.
Yeah, it's funny when the previous youth pastor before Henry Michael, when he left, I told our pastor at the time that was going to be hiring that position, was overseeing youth. I said, hey, I want to help. If you want me to help be involved, I've done lots of interviewing. I've helped in the youth group, and I feel like I have a good sense of character for people and that kind of thing. So he's like, oh, well, I'd love to help. And so he sent me a list of candidates and a few other. I think we had 6 or 7 people on the team, and said, hey, we've got some interviews, and there's one that and when I looked at it, it was Henry Michael, and I just chuckled, because obviously he was little brat when we were younger. So
Again, for the background for the listener is that our pastor's name was Henry, and he's been there for decades now. And we had his son as leaders. His son was a youth for us when we were youth leaders in the youth group, junior high and high school. And look, 7th, 8th graders, we got those. We know that they can be punks or whatever, and so that's fine. But like now, he's the youth pastor at the church.
yeah, it's pretty funny. We got in the meeting room and we were doing a Zoom call with him, and he was in Kentucky in a similar role as a youth pastor, and we're all in the room, and he pops up and he goes, "Oh, Mike's here."
Yes.
You're in trouble. You are in trouble.
All that when I told you earlier it was to come back to haunt you, this is what I meant. Well, I feel like we could go down memory lane pretty hardcore, which would be great, and a podcast that I would re-listen to over and over. But like, what are some of your most vivid memories or things that like really stick out to you from that time?
Probably I guess I'd start with probably the first memory that you guys have of me was John set up a basketball game at your house, and I drove over probably in the beat up Mercury Monarch at the time, and to hang out with you guys, and I think you guys probably were like, geez, who's this guy? John's making us hang out with them. And we hit it off right away. It was a great time of playing basketball. I'm sure I won, but
Yes, you did.
It was just neat because I didn't, the crowd that I was hanging with at the time was very different than you guys were, so you guys were a much more positive influence than those other guys were. So
probably not as cool, but maybe much more positive.
Yeah,
you really downgraded if you're looking at this from a purely social structure platform.
You did have to
that's a downgrade to us.
Trade down, that's for sure.
But then just thinking about all those times that we had, at Camp Getaway or Motel Getaway, and you know, getting kicked out of hotels. I guess maybe they didn't kick us out, but they didn't ask us to come back. Um, but that's
We did
really
get yelled at.
what we all needed at the time is, we needed those youth leaders that we had to say goofy things at midnight about Shaquille O'Neal's orientation, uh, all that stuff, just to get a laugh out of us.
Hmm.
I really needed those godly influences when it comes to men because I really didn't have that, with my dad. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, definitely all those youth trips, and I remember that first Purdue trip for challenge. I think that was the first year Five Oaks went on the challenge trip.
Yeah, you're
Um,
right.
and it was just amazing. And the interesting part I think of it is whether it was basketball or volleyball or I don't know, throwing the
Hmm.
frisbee, whatever it was, it wasn't always that, you know, the three of us and Bill or whoever else was involved at the time always had the same things in common or the same interests. A lot of that stuff ebbed and flowed, but Jesus Christ was the center,
Hmm.
and that made things. We wanted to do things together because of that. Didn't necessarily have anything to do with whether. I think about the time I think I played goalie for your soccer team. First and last time I've ever played soccer out of gym
That's right.
class. So,
Oh my goodness.
and playing football, those soccer guys, that you couldn't really put those soccer cleats on as a football
Right.
player. That couldn't happen.
I'm curious, you have these memories, like are those the memories you tell your kids about youth group? I'm assuming they kind of went through Five Oaks as well. Like, what do
Yeah.
you tell them? Like, this is how it was.
Yeah, it's interesting because Jackie and I are still very close. Our families get together on a regular basis. They're in our small group, and their kids are close with our kids.
Mm.
Um, and we talk about it all the time amongst our kids friend group, whether it be our older kids or our kids that are now in high school or in junior high youth group, and we just talk about all the memories that we had uh, from when we were in the youth group and what it meant to us, and how you know we've all changed a lot, but in many ways, for a lot of us, that love for Christ hasn't changed at all, and it maybe changed in a positive way. It's grown, and we talk about for a long time Five Oaks didn't do Camp Getaway, and I know it was about 7 or 8 years ago we started it back up, and our youth pastor at the time was looking for something else to do, and I said, hey, when I was in the youth group, here's what we did. What do you think
Oh,
about what do you
nice.
think about starting this weekend up again? you know and I remember Stephen the first time that he went, and for a lot of students that's the first time they're away from their parents for an extended
Yeah.
period of time or
Right.
family or whatever, and I remember him coming back and he was so sad, and I'm like, well, what's wrong? What happened? And he's like, I'm just so sad it's over.
Yeah.
Hmm.
He loved it so much. So we talk about that kind of stuff all the time about, the great times that we had playing football in a field that, depending on which direction you were going, you're either running uphill or downhill. And if you threw the ball too far right or left, it meant somebody was in the trees or the weeds.
Yep. Very
Um,
easily. Yeah.
so all that stuff was great, and I we talk about they still do the skits at Camp Getaway, and we talk about all the different skits that we've done in the past, and how, like I said before, just that intense time that we had together with our leaders as well, and at Five Oaks we morphed it all the way into a 1 week camp that we put
Huh.
on.
Whoa.
So, and we did the food. Stephanie and I did the food with some of our small groups for a long time, our small group leader or members. And at one point we taught, they do it a little bit differently now. We do it kind of the old style where we have a camp that we go to and they do everything.
Oh, right.
So I haven't done it for the last couple of years, but one of the last years that I was involved, our middle school director, Kyler, kind of crunched some of the numbers and said, in that 1 week at Camp Getaway, we have the same ministry time as we do the rest of the year.
Hmm.
And so, in talking about, and in thinking back to all those times that we had at Camp Getaway, and again, that intense time we had with each other and with the leaders and time of worship, and, listening to John preach the same sermon that we already heard. Yeah, so
Yes.
we definitely go back to what we did, and it's been neat to see the youth group change at Five Oaks recently, about the last 7 to 10 years,
Hmm.
and really get back to some big numbers, and numbers don't necessarily mean you have a good youth group or not, but when you live
Right.
in a city of 75,000 people, you should have a good sized youth group.
Sure.
um, and really it's an opportunity to change lives, and for me, there's no way that we would be having this conversation without Five Oaks Youth Group.
Yeah.
So I want that same thing for my kids, those same relationships, and it's been great to see, that every all four of my sons have their group of kids they hang out with at youth group, and some just amazing bonds um, have been developed.
I'm curious, when we talked to Jackie about this, her answer has surprised me a little bit. Do they have the same type of friendships that we did, where you mentioned it before, right? Like, it wasn't just Wednesday nights or Sunday mornings. Like, if we went to church together on Sunday mornings, it was very likely that we had slept over at somebody's house the night before.
Yeah.
We were doing all this stuff out. Like, we were, like, you guys were my main friends.
Yeah.
I didn't really do anything with anyone else. Do your kids have the same experience or no?
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting. First part about that is, I think, Scott, for you and I, it was a little bit different, because I think your family life was definitely better than mine, but not really revolving around church the way
Mm-hmm.
Caleb, maybe yours was. And so I think it was different for us because I didn't want to hang out with my parents. I didn't want to be at home. Um, it was a much better influence to be at your house, hanging out with you guys. And I think, Bill was kind of in the same situation, where I think from a parenting structure and from a family structure, it was good, but not really Christ centered like Caleb, like yours was,
Mm-hmm.
or some of the other folks that were in the youth group at the time when we would hang out at their house. And I don't know if that has anything to do with whether that's why we did that or not, because to answer your question, my kids, their best friends are from Five Oaks Youth Group,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or from our small group. Just amazing relationships that they have. But to your point, we were maybe our lives were a little more entwined because there really wasn't the spiritual influence at home that there was within the church, and some of those families in the church.
And part of the reason that, Caleb and I, when we started talking about this, like, hey, part of what was really interesting is there were a lot of kids like you and Bill who were from outside and just found a home that way. And I don't know if that's common among what happened in the 90s with churches, or if it was just like special a little bit because, you said, yeah, we really wouldn't hang out at Bill's house. I honestly, I don't even know if I ever went to his house. Like, I mean,
Definitely
that's,
not
I'm
as
not,
much as I
that's,
went to your house. That's for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's not a slam or anything. I just like, that was kind of, you're right. That was like a separate thing. And so it's really interesting to me to hear you talk about it in your experience, because in your experience, it was like the family you needed, the family you wanted
Yes.
at that time, right? To help you really develop into not only, a good kid at that time and a good student and everything, but also a good adult. And then like your kids have the same familial experience without the same need. because you've created it for them because you know how important that is. You want to see that in their life too.
Yeah, and I don't know, obviously, back then I have no idea what your parents, what they set out to have as far as a culture in your house. But I talk about just being a mom, and some people, which I know nothing about, obviously, um, but kind of
Go
having
on.
having this hospitality that certain moms have, the ability to say, I don't care if there's a bunch of sweaty guys in my house. I'm going to make cookies and I'm going to have snacks around. I thought about, I've mentioned your mom many times when I've talked about this culture that we want to create in our house. And I'd like to see other folks in our small group create, because
Mm.
that's where I want our kids to be. And your house was not just a safe place to be, because in some cases I just needed a safe place to be, not because it really was I was in that much danger or anything like that, but I need a safe place just to be.
Sure.
But it was more than that. It was, if your mom offered us something to eat, you better eat it whether you're hungry or not, because she's going to keep offering. It was like we were going to offend her if we didn't eat her cookies.
Yeah. It's a polite thing to do.
And I really think that's a gift that not all people have. And I'm using the mom context because I think about your mom a lot in that way. She just always made us feel welcome. Didn't matter if we were making a mess in the basement, we were eating up all the food. That's where she wanted all of us to be, And same thing, Caleb, for you guys. It's, your family. I think anyway, your family wanted us to be there, but they wanted our friend group to hang out at your house. Partially because we wouldn't get into as much trouble, and they could keep an eye on us. But
My parents still ask about all you guys, like, hey, have you heard from him? Have you talked to them? And my dad still cannot pronounce your last name from day one.
yeah. So I do think it's a little bit different in the fact that we now have that culture in our house, and maybe to some degree we have, our kids don't know enough people like me when I was, pre 1996. Spent a little too much time in youth group and not enough time, around the tax collectors and sinners. I don't think anybody collects taxes anymore that way, but yeah, I mean, so that is a struggle, for us. We've done homeschool, or Minnesota Virtual Academy really is what we've done, which is, just really a virtual school. Stephen went to Woodbury Middle School in 6th grade, Simon as well. Gideon Logan, we probably have a different plan. But at the time, we really just have always just gone year to year on everybody. Part of what I really wanted to make sure is that our kids had the opportunity to influence kids that were like me, when we were younger, because that's what happened. I was influenced one way or the other, either the good way or the bad way, and
We were innocent
yeah,
for the most part.
no, yeah, well, and there's going to be a little, tomfoolery going on in every, friend group.
We definitely had the tomfoolery, and I think it's something too about like Scott, your house. Like it was just that like we had that whole basement, and your parents were, and like we'd be out in the hot tub, and like I think that was one of the differences is like at my house you could maybe be there, but you're kind of right on top of my parents, and so I think that did make it like a place where it just felt like, oh, it can be there, and as long as we're not crazy loud, it wasn't that big of a deal if we were up late. Where if at my house, if we were up late, it just didn't take much for my parents to hear, and so it's just I think it did make it for a fun, safe place to be a lot. So
Have either of you told your kids about NFRs?
Well, I mean, there might have been a mention
You both should
of
see.
the hot tub
listeners should see
situation.
their face.
Yeah.
I have never.
Well,
Never.
on a pretty regular basis, Stephanie has to correct me on what our kids should and shouldn't be doing, or what I'm okay with because of our youth. And we have great kids, and they don't really get into trouble. But
Right.
every once in a while I say, well, just do this. I don't think you're supposed to do that, Mike. Okay, well, don't do that then. Listen to your mom.
So some of the people listening may remember what an NFR was, but the reason I bring this up is because we actually did get a hot tub for various reasons here, and Simon is 12. He's going to turn 13. It's like, okay, how do I explain this to him? And at what point do I tell him we did this? The NFR stands for Naked Fun Run, where we would jump out of the hot tub, usually in the winter, take off our swimsuits, run around the house once, maybe twice, maybe jump in the snow, very naked and wet, and then jump back in the hot tub.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I don't, we never got caught, as far as I know. Maybe
No
the
ring
neighbors
doorbells
talked to your
back
dad.
then. You know what I mean?
That would change the dynamic, wouldn't it? The ring doorbells.
That's right. That's right. So I'm curious just in terms of, how you've seen things change like with your kids a little bit while things also remain the same. You and Stephanie have been able in your small group and everything, been able to maintain some of that same stuff. Like how has faith in your life changed for you then? I mean, 30 years at the same church, you've seen a lot of change at the establishment itself, but just life in general, right? You're a successful guy, you got good family, like how has faith changed along with that or changed you?
Yeah, it's interesting because now when I look in the mirror at 45 years old, I'm now the same age as all those old guys that were helping out with the youth group
I think
when
about
we were
that
there.
all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, going back to their influence, I mean that's really, where I wanted to be, where I strived to be back then. And I look, from being just so new in my faith in high school. And just like I'm sure anyone who is a teenager when they cross the line of faith, just bouncing back and forth between old friends and new friends and like all of us, falling into this bad habit or this, whether it be using language that I shouldn't use or whatever the situation is. I was so raw in my faith back then, but really had a childlike faith that felt like, I belonged in Christ's kingdom, and that's where I was going to be. And going back to growing up Catholic, thinking about, they talk about purgatory, and if you haven't gone to confession and all that stuff, and really works driven, and we know that none of us are good enough, and without Christ dying on the cross for us, we don't have a chance. And so thinking, like you said, 30 years later, it's interesting as kind of as reflecting on, some of these questions and some things that we've been talking about, with Stephanie and I through this. In many ways, I still have that childlike faith in a lot of areas because the Bible can be very clear and it can be hard to understand, and some things can be a mystery. And in many ways, you have to say, I have faith that God has a plan for me, that He's running my life, and even when I don't feel in control, He is. So I still have that childlike faith at the same time, very raw back then in wisdom and Bible knowledge and good rhythms in life. Falling asleep at a Bible study and now I teach one is a little bit different.
Excellent. It's like, look, we're all parents, right? It's like you're trying to teach your kids something and like they don't do it for like 8 years and suddenly they start doing it. You're like, oh, it's, thankfully I kept teaching them that over the whole time and
Yeah.
they finally clicked. It's like, man, John, those youth leaders, Henry probably to a certain degree too, was like, they'll get it eventually, but not right now. And
Yeah.
they just let us be us during that time.
I'm supposed to teach my kids stuff? What?
Your wife does that for you.
Probably a little behind.
Mike, is there anything that you've thought about from specifically your experience there that you like struggle with, you wish would have been different, still kind of confusing? Anything that's just kind of like, that was weird?
Not really. I think part of it was I was so new to a relationship with Jesus Christ
Mm-hmm.
that I really didn't know any better one way or the other, what was right, what was wrong, what was the best way to teach, that kind of thing. Yeah, so not really. I mean, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, Five Oaks has really grown a lot over the years. Henry's preaching style has grown, so but as far as, from the youth group, probably not really anything that comes to mind. It
Mm-hmm.
was really a good experience. And like I said at the time, maybe the biggest thing is it was a safe place, you know,
Mm-hmm. That's true.
where I was accepted, where, I knew that I was around other kids that wanted me to be there,
Mm-hmm.
and in the midst of, my parents getting divorced recently, I think a lot of kids at that time feel like one or both of the parents don't want them, you know.
Sure. It's good to walk through that history of it. I'd forgotten some of that for you, and it's like, yeah, whether it was the our youth pastors or the leaders, like they were pretty adept at creating that space. Like, hey, this kid is coming from a hard situation, let's support him, that kind of thing. And Caleb and I really haven't had conversations yet where somebody might have an opposite experience, and maybe they
Sure.
did, but it was kind of like, I know a few people might have gotten kicked out or whatever. I don't remember the circumstances, but it was kind of like, what I'm hearing you say is that when you came, you realized kind of what you needed, and you just kind of like fell right into it, and you were just like, I need this, and I'm not going to give it up.
Yeah, whether I even knew I need it or not, I don't know.
Hmm.
I just knew it was the right place for me to be pretty much all the time.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yep.
As we've talked about the amount of time we spent together, that's what I needed. You know, that's where I needed to be. That's what God's plan was for me,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think these are my two favorite questions on our list. What would your 18-year-old self say to your 45-year-old self, and vice versa?
Well, I think I'll start with my 45-year-old self would say to my 18-year-old self, "You don't know anything. You have
Yeah,
a
man.
lot to learn, sir." Yeah, I think, when we're that age, you think you know everything. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I'm rebelling against my parents. They don't, I know better."
Hmm.
I think maybe in some cases I did know better because I had a bad parenting experience with
Hmm.
my parents. Um,
Sure.
but I really didn't know anything. I barely knew up from down. And, I think now my 18-year-old self would say, that he's proud to see where I've gone in my faith, not because of anything that I had to do with it,
Hmm.
because I'm still the same snot-nosed brat that I was back then. It's just Christ has led me down this path, and I've been pretty blessed to have Stephanie hold my hand through that experience for what this August will be 25 years
Jeez.
in marriage. So
Awesome.
yeah, and truly for us, not any really bad times, but good times and bad, just like any marriage,
Hmm.
and struggles and all that stuff, whether it be at work or at home, or we've held hands together through the last 25 years in our faith journey together. And because of Five Oaks and Pastor Henry and, the path that Christ has led me down, it's why I am who I am today,
Hmm.
you know. And I think my teenage self would be pretty surprised that I'm leading a small group and, maybe some of the other stuff, helping with youth group events or ushering or that stuff's all, you know, everybody can do that really.
Sure.
But leading other men or other families, I don't know that I would have expected that, or maybe would I have thought that I would want to do that.
Hmm.
Whether it's need or just like, hey, this is my time. Like,
Yeah.
you've been there as they needed you, which is great. You kind of wrapped up a lot there of what I was going to ask, which is great, which is totally fine. I don't want to, keep jabbering on. My last question to you, Mike, is what is the not from like when your kids were around in youth group, but like our late 90s youth group. What was the craziest thing you remember happening, doing, being a part of? Just like the thing that you're just like, we probably should not have done.
Well, that's pretty easy. Camp getaway. I think it was actually motel getaway. It was the last time we used a motel. I was in John's room. I think it was me and I don't know, two other guys or whatever. But our skit was a fashion show, and John played a homosexual talk show host. And at one point, I was walking down the runway and I was wearing breakaway pants, and he ripped my breakaway pants away.
Oh
I
my!
don't remember this at all.
You don't remember that?
Were we there?
You were there. His name was Serge.
That gets a little memory spark. Very small spark.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
definitely one of those things where I think if that happens today, John is unemployed. So
Only if it comes to light. No,
yeah.
it's like no, I like that question just because it's like we get some different answers when I'm always hoping like people just say the kidnapping, because for me that was the craziest thing, right? Like
Yeah.
we literally kidnap kids from their house. But like everyone has a little bit different response.
Yeah, because of where I was at, crossing line of faith, if you will, midway through the ministry season, I never had the opportunity to get kidnapped because you
Right.
didn't kidnap a sophomore in high school, and I was bigger than most of the men in the.
I was gonna say
Beat us up.
There would have been a battle.
kidnapping you.
Yeah.
You were
Sir,
actually
can you get in this car?
you were actually on the list, but we crossed you off. It's like,
Yeah.
no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, that I didn't have that opportunity to get kidnapped, so
I didn't either. They didn't start that till I was older, significantly older.
But Mike,
Yeah.
you were part of it though, like as a junior senior, right? Like you kidnapped kids for us.
I don't think we did. The kidnappings must have started and stopped.
I love that line.
With me starting in the youth group, because I don't think we did it. At least I didn't help kidnap anybody, and my assumption was I would have.
You've been like, yes.
Yeah,
this is
I
great.
definitely would have. Yeah, we tell Henry, Michael, and I talk all the time about if we're in a group of folks that didn't know that the two of us knew each other pre his time here.
Mhm.
And I said, John came up to me one day and said at church and said, "Hey, I got a job for you. I want you to help out with youth group." And I'm like, "Dude, you do not want. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't help at youth group. What do you want me to do? Lead a small group? No, I can't do that." He goes, "Oh no, I just need you to beat up little kids." "Oh yeah, I could do that." I said, "Sure, fine. That's not a problem. What do you want me to beat up?" He said, "I just need you to sit on Henry Michael and let him scream like a little girl." "Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. That's right in my wheelhouse."
Those were the skills God gave you to be part of the youth group.
Yes,
That's why He brought you in.
Hey, there's lots of roles in a church, and
That's right. That's right.
Sometimes it's sitting on the future youth pastor of the church.
Yep.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, every once in a while, I'll look at him and said, "Don't make me chase you. You will scream like a little girl, and everyone will hear it."
Speaking of all these, these reboots that people do and, reenact some of these things, like we should just do like a Carmen sketch as adults or something.
Yeah.
Just like see how that for the kids, see what they think.
Yeah.
I don't think we should. I think we can let the Carmen sketches die in the 90s. I think that's the right place for him.
It sounds like what Mike's wife Stephanie would say to him about his ideas. Like, no, you don't.
No,
You're
that's
not
not right.
going to do that. You're not doing that.
I don't have to say that to any of my kids. My kids, I kind of need to push my kids. Like, you guys should go break the rules. I remember telling when they went to their first getaway, like with the youth group, I was like, you guys get in trouble. And they didn't. But I need to push my kids. Like, you guys should go try and get in trouble because that's just not a problem we have. We need you to break some rules.
Yeah, for the most part, that's my kids as well.
I told Caleb in our little interim earlier that like the four of us, the three of us here, including Bill, who we've already talked to, could just sit around and record a few of these of like stupid stuff that we did, and that'd be something that just the four of us would want to listen to, but it would still be fun. So
Yeah, if you need hours worth of audio, we could fulfill that need.
just
Pick an
content.
event, right?
Straight
Like
content.
best barf night memory. Here's they are. Best camp getaway memory. That could be best pool night memory.
Yeah, it's funny. It was the first year we did Camp Getaway the full week, and all of a sudden this girl comes into the kitchen. I'm getting stuff ready, and it's a pretty big camp that we used, and she's laughing, but she's kind of got stuff all over. And I said, "What happened?" She goes, "Oh, I just threw up." And I'm like, "Oh, you okay?" She goes, "Oh no, I'm having a blast." and they were doing a game where they had to see who could drink the most orange soda out of a 2-liter, and she threw up during drinking the 2-liter, and I said, now that's when you know you're doing things right, when they're throwing up and having a good time. And there's no alcohol involved.
You talked about earlier, it's just a unique spot to be in. Like, be as crazy as you can, push the boundaries, but also still we're not trying to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And at least for us, I think in probably other situations, it was definitely approaching some sort of like hazing or whatever, not to throw that word around flippantly, but everyone is trying to maximize the word you used, intense hilarity of it all, and then bring it and then pair that with just like the message.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, to me, was what we did in the 90s at Youth Group, was be as zany as possible, and then also, be serious about the message part of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Say, Mike, it was super good having you on. Super good to talk to you after 20 years. I can't believe it's just been that long, but it does kind of just feel like yesterday. We can slide back in and keep chatting and remember these things together. So really great talking to you. Thanks for being here. Yeah, it's good to see you.
It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. You mentioned that Purdue trip. We drove out there, didn't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember, it was the trip back or the trip out there, like you made the driver, whoever they were, God bless them, play that Supertone song on repeat like 100 times. And everybody.
It would either have been John or David. Right?
Holy moly. Yeah.
One of those two.
Yeah.
I wasn't in John's van.
He would split us up.
I feel like I was in the van with you, Mike, because I think I was always, because I wasn't allowed to be in the van with Scott,
right?
And I wasn't allowed to be in the van with Aaron. So I think I was in your van, Mike, and I think we were the van that just played that song over. I mean, I still like that song.
It's still good. Just everyone, all the younger kids in the van were so mad.
Well, it was funny on that trip. I don't remember what the situation was. I was playing a Miss Pac-Man machine, and all of a sudden I hear John and some other guy like going at it verbally, and I don't know what happened, but John was really pissed, and never before, never since had I ever seen him like that before. And I think I think John was there as well, trying to like talk John off this cliff, but I'm playing this Miss Pac-Man machine, and I don't even know why it was there. It was like it wasn't like an arcade. It was just a random Miss Pac-Man machine in some hallway. Sure. Yeah. And I remember stopping the game like in mid-turn and thinking, John needs help. It's on. Like, let's go here.
I'm glad I brought my switchblade.
Getting him. And I have no idea what was going on. But I ran over there, and I think when I got over there and John saw the look on my face, he was like, oh, whatever's happening is way out of control because Mike looks like he's going to kill somebody.
Wow.
And then he cooled off. And I don't know what it was about or, how it all transpired, but
this is now a mystery this podcast will uncover. We'll talk to John.
Yeah.
We'll try and track down the guy that John was yelling at. Talk to him. Talk to John himself. That'd be funny. I bet we talk to John and be like, that is not the only time I've gotten that mad.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It has been interesting, all the little things that people have brought up, like the story that that Jackie brought up. I was like, oh my gosh! The second she said it, I was like, oh, I remember now. So it is really funny. Like people bring something up, and then you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh man, you know. Well, now I think you got to do the outro again. I mean, we got to include all this. So yeah,
You just
it's like the Minnesota goodbye of
You could-
podcasts.
we're gonna test your skills
That's
as an
right.
editor here.
You're gonna splice this in before what I said before, right? Like,
Look, again, I
Yeah.
just said I re-recorded my whole side of a conversation because I screwed it up. I can probably figure this out.
jeez.
Yeah, and you know it's interesting because I'm purposely not on social media. As for me as a business owner, I think it's a bad idea. I try to stay away from. I have political leanings and spiritual leanings and all that stuff, but try to stay out of the public eye. Other than I just want you to buy ice cream. Nobody needs to hear whether I think we should, decorate a cake for a homosexual couple or not. That's I'm here to.
But that lines right up with Dairy Queen.
Yeah, I'm here to sell ice cream. So, but Stephanie just has Facebook, So, but after I listened to your first episode or teaser or whatever, Stephanie went on Facebook and say just all these people that responded, and then you start to go down the rabbit hole of looking at their page and who they, just connecting all the
right.
dots. And obviously, without talking to anyone, a picture can make things look very different than what's in their heart. And everybody goes through bad times or good times or, falls away from what they think or believe they should be doing at the time. So not trying to judge anybody, but looking at some of those folks, and I'm like, oh, that kind of hurts that they're in that place, in remembering what they were when we were in youth group.
I had a couple people message me and say, yeah, I'd love to chat. I don't go to church anymore or anything, so I don't know if this would be useful. I'm like, no. Like, I kind of not to like, honestly, like not to like persuade them back or anything,
Yeah.
but like, just why?
Yeah. What happened?
Yeah. And, this is not a bad thing. It's just like Caleb said, it's been so positive, and there hasn't been a lot of people being like, well, I had this, I'm back now, or this thing happened either in high school or college and I'm just done. Like, okay.
Yeah.
It's a safe space to share how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't really gotten there yet. And a couple of them were talking to me and I almost had them scheduled and they've kind of like stopped talking to me. I'm like, oh man, like,
Yeah.
you're actually, I want to talk to you as much.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear both sides of it. I mean, it's not where I may, like I still consider myself, we still go to church and stuff like that, but like I'm interested to know like what happened. And like that idea of like you talked about, Mike, the idea of a safe space, like it'd be nice to be able to maybe do that, like create a safe space where somebody can just come and share like what's on their mind and what's happened. Cause like, that's a valid life experience. And I want to hear why it is. And maybe that is something that just is good for them to get, there's been a couple episodes where we've joked about, oh, this is just free therapy for me and Scott. Like, like maybe that's just good for somebody to just get it off their chest. And, I'm not trying to, we've kind of had the mantra of like, we're not going to argue with anybody. Like people are going to say things that we don't agree with. And me and when Scott says stuff, there's times where I don't agree and I'm just like, I don't totally agree with that. And I'm sure I said plenty of things he doesn't agree with.
Ever since I've known
But it's just that chance to that chance to give people a place to come and share and be safe to say what's on their mind and how they got to where they're at.
Journey is interesting, man.
The interesting thing is we had such a great relationship, and for whatever reason, Scott, you just didn't live close to us anymore.
Right.
So that relationship isn't going to be the same simply because of distance.
Mm-hmm.
And when we when we were college age, distance meant a lot more than it does now.
Yeah.
Zoom didn't exist in 2001. So, but the interesting thing for me is, Caleb, even I think it was at Hannah's graduation party or or Kara's, maybe it was Kara's birthday party, and I didn't go. I don't remember what I had going on. It must have been Kara's birthday party, and
Yeah.
Stephanie talked to you, and you were just kind of down about, either the church you were at recently or, whatever was going on. I'm like, oh, I feel bad about that because, and not that we don't. I mean, obviously we've talked now for an hour and a half,
Right.
but and we kept in touch because of softball
Right.
longer
Yep.
than
Right.
than Scott, you and I did, but we don't have a close friendship,
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, I feel terrible. What could we do to, and I even and life gets in the way, and that's partially my fault. Not partially, it's all my fault. But I remember talking to Bill saying, hey, is there anything I can do to encourage Caleb? Because you just seemed pretty down that particular conversation you had with Steph. And I'm like, oh, it stinks because, you know, completely opposite of what's happening for us right now at Five Oaks. And Five
Yeah.
Oaks, I mean, I think Five Oaks especially, and I wish you guys still went to Five Oaks, wish everybody went to Five Oaks. But there are a
It's a
lot
big
of
church then.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the reality of it is, being part of the kingdom, there's a lot of other good churches out there.
Oh, for sure.
And
Yeah.
and I understand that not everyone lives in Woodbury or wants to commute. So, but I just remember thinking, oh, I feel terrible about that because I wish you had that same experience that I was having at Five Oaks where you
Right.
were, which you currently or clearly at the time you didn't have that same
Yeah.
experience.
Mhm.
And so even just thinking through some of the names from when we were younger and thinking totally forgot about them or hadn't forgot about them,
Right.
but
Yep.
really had no idea where they were,
Yep.
if they were alive, or what their faith journey even looked like.
Yeah.
And then to say, oh well, maybe they don't really have a faith journey right now.
Yeah.
It's on pause, however that is. But that makes me sad because what we had when we were younger was totally different, and how on fire so many kids were for Christ.
It brings up the comment, and it was actually funny. There's, when I asked that question to Jackie, like, what are some things you look back on that you don't, kind of rub you the wrong way or whatever? And her response was John's comment where he would always say, well, I don't care where you're at now. I care where you're at 10 years from now. That's
Yeah.
literally the genesis of me thinking, hey, we should talk to people, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a statement kind of, founded in idealism. Like, you want everyone to still be on fire or whatever your phrase we're going to use. And it just, life happens, man. And like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
obviously you can't prepare a high school kid for that. You can't prepare them for everything,
Mm-hmm.
I think our youth group was rather unique in that it was not super antagonistic. It was relatively welcoming, but I know plenty of people who went to youth groups that were like, hey, everyone outside this youth group is the enemy, so watch out. And then they get
Yeah.
out there and it's like, they're not the enemy, and they have this totally different experience, or they have to process some of this hard stuff that we're offering through free therapy for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, that stuff happens, and some people just end up being like, no, I'm done. It's that
Yeah.
why that journey part is always going to be very, very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Well, as you're doing the podcast, if we want to get the band together at some point, and I'd be more than happy to host.
I was telling Caleb, like, the 8 of us 4 and our wives, should get together and just like have dinner. Like, that would be
Yeah,
awesome.
for sure. Yeah.
That would
Yeah, I'm
rule.
even saying if we want to have 50 people, whatever the number is. Stephanie.
Scott, do you have more wives I don't know about?
Yeah.
Who's Mike
I've
talking about?
changed.
Yeah, but if anything ever comes up and we want to do a 90s youth group reunion,
Dude,
I'd be more than happy to host. So
That'd be interesting.
that'd be
Oh,
cool.
man.
That's a good
Yeah.
idea, actually.
yeah, and you guys obviously are plugged into more of the people from our past than I am. I'm not plugged in at all.
Mm.
And maybe partially because I've chosen not to be.
I'm not either. That's the distinction we found in doing the shows. I'm like I left.
Yeah.
Like my senior year ended. Obviously some stuff went down that contributed. I'm like the only person we've talked to so far who hasn't gone back and done at least some time as a post high school helper. I'm the only one. It's like, it's really weird.
Yeah.
That's my thing, is if it's not in front of me, I'm not great about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just what happens with relationships, right?
Yeah.
Again, you're like, it's not right in front of me. It's not a thing I've got to deal with right now. So it falls off. And that's what happens.
Yeah. Well, and for us, we talk about doing life together with our small group, and I've been in a small group. That's kind of the other story that I talk about with folks all the time is, I don't know, it was maybe a year after we were married. I don't think I was old enough to drink yet. And John said, "Oh, you got to come to my small group." And I said, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm busy on Sunday nights." And a few months later, he says, "You got to come to our small group." And I'm like, yeah, "Good luck, buddy." No. And then one day he walks up and he said, "Why don't you guys come over for dinner tonight? We're having a small group." No, I don't. That's okay. And then finally he said, "You are going to come to my house for small group tonight, or I'm going to hurt you." And I thought, well, I guess I can go because otherwise we're going to get into a battle.
That's right.
But I've been in small groups, ever since then. And when you truly talk about doing life together, it's hard to have 25 relationships, deep relationships.
Yeah.
So that is part of it. It's hard to connect with everybody.
That's true.
So,
Yeah.
but it would be a blast to get together and go out. I feel sorry
Yeah.
for the restaurant because
We'll treat
there
it
might
like
be
that
some-
motel.
yeah,
Jason is going to push somebody into the.
that was me. I fell in the pool.
Yeah, you fell.
Yeah, that we were all in like a massive hug,
Yes.
and it
Yes.
just kept creeping closer and closer to
Yep.
the pool, and
Yep.
all of a sudden there was no floor left.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Uh,
All right, there's the end. Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. Once again, we want to thank Mike for joining us. It was great to hear from him. It was great to hear how Youth Group impacted him and to remember the 1989 Mercury Monarch and all the other fun memories that we got to talk about. It was just great to hear about his journey over the last 25 to 30 years. So thanks, Mike. Thanks for coming on the show. We really do appreciate it. The music that you hear at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG. You can also email us at ISurviveYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, drop us a line. We'd love to have you. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoyed this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's a chance to talk about some of the music I've documented and share from my calendar. Once again, it's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon. All right. I should probably help you get this file to me.
yeah.
Sure.
before
Stop
we,
record. Should I start recording now or stop?
You son of a...
Oh, and I don't know if I recorded this last one on Zoom. Oh, I hope our audio worked. Oh, well, 2/3 of a conversation.
You kidnap kids for us.